I appreciate the songs that were chosen this morning. We hadn't worked it out at all, but I do appreciate the personalization, I guess it gives. When we talk about our relationship to God, it's sometimes in a general sense, and this is a very specific personal sense, and I think that goes along well with the lesson today of looking at the scriptures, the lessons that we have, and taking them in a personal way. Whenever we hear about a tragedy, whether it be a weather calamity or fire or something along those lines, or someone is found to be ill or even has died, it's a sad event. It's something that we look upon with sorrow, with empathy within our hearts. Even if we don't know who that person is, we can empathize with them to an extent. But how much different is it when someone you know is going through trouble, or is ill, or has died? How much more difficult for you is it that when that happens to them, that you realize that they won't be around anymore? The pain that you feel is much more real. It's much more poignant to you in that because of your familiarity with that person. That's not directly what I'm going to talk about today, but it kind of sets a concept for where I wanted to talk. It's a kind of a word picture to use to set that concept. I would like to turn to Genesis chapter 39. That'll be where we'll be taking the main lesson from today. It's a story of Joseph. And Joseph, leading up to this time, we know him to be the 12th child of Jacob. By various mothers, his siblings were born. He had several brothers that were born before him, and a sister who was born there. And we know that his brothers became angry with him because he had special visions, that he had a special place with his father, and that they, in an attempt to get rid of him, wound up selling him to the Midianites, Ishmaelite slave traders. And so that is where we pick up here in chapter 39, beginning in verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and observed him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put in his hand. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, that all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Now, we know that Joseph was in a tough position, that he was taken from his family, from his home, and put into this slave situation, that he was going to be a servant. And we see that he was loyal to his master. He was faithful in his duties, and he was rewarded for that in his position within the house, and that God was with him also in the things that he did, and made the ideas that he had prosper within the house. And his master saw that and rewarded him for that. Unfortunately, because the way the translators broke up the verses, we also had some foreshadowing as to what's to come next. So if you pick up again in verse 7, now it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. And now we see Potiphar's wife coming in and adding turmoil to his situation, as added temptation for him to be in, makes things even more difficult for him. We can see from his reaction he's uncomfortable with that idea, that he wants to be a faithful servant. He wants to serve his master. He wants to serve his God, even in the face of these difficult times. And then as we continue on the next couple verses, "But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me.' But he left the garment in her hand and fled and ran outside." So we see here that even when she's being forcible, that he's not giving in to it. He's not allowing himself to fall into that temptation, and he takes great pains to avoid it. He runs away, even leaving his garment aside. It didn't matter. He needed to get out of that situation. And we see his faithfulness to God in difficult circumstances, which in itself is a great lesson. But I want to be able to take a closer look at this story that's been given to us, the example that is there, because there are details that are missing. There are things that aren't revealed to us about the situation, and it may seem easy for us to look at that, and some unknown person comes upon you, to be able to resist, to be able to turn away. It would seem easier because we're not there. We're not in that situation. We know little about him, and we know even less about her. We don't even know her name. Thinking of Joseph, trying to get an idea of where he is as we follow through in the lineage of his siblings being born, to get an idea of possibly how old he is, I guess would be maybe in his early 20s. Something along those lines. It's a time, it gives some time for him to establish himself in Potiphar's household. Maybe that took a year or two, something like that. But we see him in the prime of his life. To speak in the world sense, this is his time to live. This is his time to sow his wild oats, so to speak, that people will try to say. And this is where he can. You would expect someone like that to have less control over his impulses. We see his remarkable resistance to sin and his dedication to his masters both on earth and in heaven. And Potiphar's wife, no details are really given about her. But I wanted to think about some possibilities just to bring it closer to our own situations, to bring it closer to something we can relate to. You know, if we had a movie of this, we would see an actress there of a certain age, of a certain image, and we would have some sort of background to work off of and to feel more empathy for Joseph in this situation. Was she good looking? Would that have swayed his reaction to her on how attractive she actually was? We know that he was attractive. Was she possibly of the same age? Could be somebody very similar to him, someone that he would pair up with well. What is her situation, her family situation, and how much of that did Joseph know? Being in the household, he probably had a good idea. And if she were in a lonely situation, suffering maybe from lack of interest by her husband, lack of appreciation for her, maybe that would create more empathy in Joseph, to give him more of an excuse. Maybe he sees her with low self-confidence, and give him a feeling of, boy, I wouldn't want to damage her self-image anymore. In Joseph's situation, we know that he's in a lowly position as a servant within the household, that he's lonely, he's on his own, he's been separated from his family and everything that he's known previous to this in his life. A young man of physical urges, and wouldn't being hooked up with the wife of this powerful man, wouldn't that have benefits for him? Wouldn't that have possible benefits for him here on earth, and favors that could be done? In a worldly sense, this would be the kind of thing that you would consider. What could this do for me? How could this benefit me? Now, as we look through the various lessons that are provided for us on Joseph, one word comes to mind quite a bit: providence. Okay? And if anybody knows me, they know I love me a good bit of providence. With things that just kind of happen, and you say, wow, that's an amazing coincidence, right? In human terms, we call it a coincidence. And I have less belief in coincidences, but rather that things happen for a reason, that things come about. And I want to share a little bit with you today, because it struck me this week. As I was preparing this lesson, Tuesday night, I set it aside and said, well, I'm going to get some dinner. So I fixed myself some dinner, and of course, if you're sitting there by yourself, you can't just sit down and eat a meal in silence. That's kind of boring. So, of course, I popped me the TV on, and I just so happened to be working through a TV show called The Big Bang Theory, thanks to my soon-to-be housemate back there who loaned me the DVDs. So put that in there, and the episode that came on just happened to touch on something similar. One of the characters was there, not very popular with the ladies, and now suddenly this attractive woman is coming on to him and is desiring to be with him. And now this is something that we can kind of understand. We can see, oh wow, hey, this is really something. And for a guy like me, you don't get those kind of opportunities very often. And so from a human standpoint, this is quite the opportunity to it. And he just happens to also have a girlfriend, and so now he's conflicted on this. I already have someone, and why should I go with this other person? And again, in dealing with the human nature that's there, he turns to one of his friends who quotes he refers to a philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a German, Swiss philosopher from the 1800s, who believes that all morality is just a man-made contrivance. Morality is just something that man uses to control other men. Well, now that's not helpful at all. So, like I said, I'm sitting there and watching this, and I see this, and it's very interesting that this is kind of a similar thing to the very thing that I was writing. Now, this being the 21st century and all, we don't do just two things at a time. I also had my phone out, and during this whole time, and I'm working on a little puzzle that I got there. This little word puzzle where you have a bunch of little numbered spaces, and each one of those numbers relates to a letter, and you fit all the letters in from some clues that they give, and your knowledge of the English language, and just downright good guesses, I guess, and you come up with a phrase on there. This one just happened to be right at the finished up right at the end of the thing. It was a quotation from Emily Dickinson, a writer or poet that we all know, that said, A soul must stand ajar, ready for ecstatic experiences. Now, I know that, and I looked it up. I said, now, what does that mean? Was that a bigger context or something? And it seemed like the author's main intent of that phrase was that you need to be ready for things outside of your normal day-to-day life, to things that happen. And I can understand that, to be able to see something and say, oh, this is a little different, let's try that. But things that are generally above board. And unfortunately, it seems others have taken that into a more improper sense, to say that in this situation like we would have here, Joseph's soul would need to stay ajar a little bit. Hey, don't close your mind off to it completely. This is the wisdom of the world that we have, and so we need to learn to combat against that. And of course we do that by using Scripture, by turning to God, the God that created us, and as we see, He directs the workings of our life and the events that we have. To that end, I turned to a couple of Proverbs here. If I can find them. Let's see, they put Proverbs after Psalms in this one. Proverbs chapter 6 is where I'll be starting out, in case you're a faster page turner than I. There we go. Okay, Proverbs 6, I'm beginning in verse 20. My son, keep your father's command, and do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. And when you awake, they will speak with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is a light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life, to keep you from the evil woman, from the flattering tongue of a seductress. Do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. For by means of a harlot a man is reduced to a crust of bread, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. Can a man take fire into his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be seared? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent. Now we can see here that the proverb writer had stern words of caution for anyone who might find themselves in Joseph's situation, who might find himself being tempted to pull away towards an immoral woman in that. We see here the description of that law as the lamp, the way of life, something to protect us from that, and that the danger of that adultery is death. And then another one just nearby there in chapter 7, in verse 21, I'll begin. With her enticing speech she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips she seduced him. Immediately he went after her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, he did not know it would take his life. We can see that the enticement, the seduction, seems to be a great thing, is going into it. You didn't go into it expecting calamity to result from it. We don't go into these things expecting the punishment that comes there. And even if the loss of life is not a physical loss of life as is described here, a figurative spiritual loss of life can result. That we would fall prey to something like that and trade our valuable souls for something that is so temporary, that is so worthless in the scheme of things. And so something to caution against here is this emotional attachment. This is some of the suppositions that I made there. Perhaps there were different situations. Perhaps it was something that Joseph could see, and he would have that emotional attachment with her before she comes to him. And he could react out of pity. He could react out of indignation as the way she's being treated, if she's being treated incorrectly. And in it, it would seem a noble thing to give in to her desires, to bolster her, to comfort her in this time. And it could be seen as an act of love. And now we as Christians are encouraged to love, aren't we? I turn here to Romans chapter 12 for my example. Romans chapter 12 and verse 10. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, and honor, giving preference to one another. See, he's giving us a direction to be close with one another, to care for one another. And to that I would agree to an extent. But we take a look at the verse right before that, verse 9. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Yeah, you still have love. But it needs to be in a proper sense. It needs to be in the way that the Lord has desired us to have that love and to express that love. And it's not for us to go outside of that, to use it in an improper way. Recently in our Wednesday class in 1 Peter, we also had 1 Peter 2, verse 16. He's talking about the freedoms that we have in Christ. And it says, as free, you're not using your liberty as a cloak for vice, but as servants of God. Interesting choice of words there, is acting as servants of God. And we have Joseph here as a servant in his master's household. And he is loyal to that master. And we would have freedoms. He would have freedoms throughout the house, but he doesn't use that in an improper manner. He doesn't use his freedom as a cloak for the vice that he would have been falling into. And now in a greater sense, I want to take a look in Romans chapter 8 as we take a look at our position with God. Beginning in verse 12, Romans 8 and 12. Therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. We see that special relationship we have is with God. That is where our heart should be mainly, and we understand that reward, that promise comes later, that adoption that we have. So the advice I would give you if you find yourself in a situation like that, a situation where you're tempted, and whether it's this type of sin or it could be a different type of sin, but still the concept remains, get out. Get out of the situation. Leave what you must behind, but flee. The consequences can come. There may be hurt feelings. It could be lost comfort. It could be lost friendships. We know what became of Joseph in all this, that a false accusation was given him, and he was thrown into prison. He had to face that consequence as well. But even so, that was greater than losing his place with God, losing his faith with God. None of those punishments will be as bad as the penalty of the sin. And something else I wanted to point out in closing, I did a lot of going around to different scriptures and giving different examples, and I'm sure we could come up with many more examples in the New and Old Testaments, directions that are given to us by the prophets and by the apostles. Joseph did all that he did without any of that, long before any of that was written. Long before David or Solomon came up with their writings, long before the apostles of Jesus, before all these examples, he understood his place with God the Father, and he wanted to protect that above all things. So may we also have that same attitude with the things that come up in our lives. So if there's anyone here this morning who wants to become a child of God, we have the opportunity here. The waters of baptism are here, and we ask you to come forward now while we stand and sing the invitation song.